bring in Albert Breer, senior NFL reporter, lead content strategist for the Monday Morning Quarterback. The best job opening based off the quarterback position. Albert, where would you start?
It's easy. I want to see if your answer is the same as mine.
Are you going to say Jacksonville?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like, if just the quarterback situation. Now, that's what we're talking about, right?
Yeah.
Like the quarterback situation in a vacuum without considering ownership, GM, anything else.
Yeah.
Like just the quarterback himself.
Yeah.
You've got, I think, a guy who's still a generational prospect. Now, there are people in the NFL that don't think as highly of him as they did a year ago. And there's some stuff that's shown up. I think, when you look at where Trevor is after a year, does he process as fast? Does he see it as fast as you thought he might have coming out of Clemson? But the talent is still undeniable. And you've got 3 years left on his rookie contract, which means you're going to be playing from ahead for the next 3 years. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's a pretty easy number one. The Jaguars are the one.
All right. Who's number two?
So I got the list in front of me. I mean, maybe Chicago. It depends on what you think of Justin Fields. There's less of a consensus on Justin Fields than there was on Trevor Lawrence. So maybe Chicago. See, it depends. It's like, do you really like Justin Fields, or do you want to have like a chance to go and take a big swing, because I would argue, like, you look at the Broncos and like just the fact that you've got like this like open canvas on which to create your own quarterback situation. And like, you've got the opportunity, I think, over the next, year or two, where they've got a lot of capital, they've got cap space, they've got young talent on the roster. And I know, like, you look at it and say, okay, well, Teddy Bridgewater and Drew Lock aren't who you're going to build around. But, I look at like the opportunity to maybe do what they did in 2012 and take a gigantic swing on a quarterback as a real plus, and I think you can make the argument too, Dan. They have a lot of the same things going for them that they had in 12. Like when they had the young receivers in 12 and Decker and Demaryius Thomas. Right now they got Jerry Jeudy, KJ Hamler, Cortland Sutton, and Tim Patrick. They've got a good young tight end in Noah Fant. They've got some good young pieces on the offensive line. They've got Javonte Williams in the backfield. They've got pieces on defense and Patrick Surtain and Bradley Chubb, the same way you looked at it in 12, where, it was, again, the receivers, it was guys like Julius Thomas. It was on defense, Von Miller and Chris Harris. I think there's an attractive situation there for a veteran quarterback. So, I think if you look at the current quarterback situation, the Broncos would be towards the bottom of the list. But if you're looking at what you can maybe make it into, I think they're way further up the list.
Yeah, I think that's a sneaky team, but you're also playing in the AFC West as well.
Right.
Why did the Giants wait an extra day to fire Joe Judge?
I think it was as much as anything else, seeing where the meetings took them. And, I do think ownership's become a little reactionary there. They're in a very, I would say, unfamiliar spot. They're used to be seeing as like the Steelers are, where they're this, this flagship organization that doesn't operate in a herky-jerky way, that doesn't make rash decisions. And I think for them, it took them some time to wrap their arms around the idea of firing, a third straight coach after 2 years. Now consider this, Dan, in the 85 years before 2016, when they hired Ben McAdoo, that had only happened once. They'd only fired a coach after 2 years once. They've now done it 3 times in 6 years. So I think they had to wrap their arms around the idea of doing that, and then I do think that there is some taking the temperature of the room there, and maybe even taking the temperature of, the outside and what it was and how people on the outside were digesting all of it. And I think, as recently as Friday or Saturday, I think John Mayer's plan was to hold on to Joe Judge as his coach. And I just think the more he took the temperature of the room, the more he watched what happened on Sunday, the more he felt like to create what was an attractive situation for the next general manager, and get the best guy to be his next general manager, he had to do what he wound up doing last night.
Yeah, I was told yesterday that one of the reasons why they probably waited a day is they took the temperature on candidates for the GM job. Mm-hmm. And you don't want to go into that job in that market and try to clean up that mess, and then you get leftovers as a head coach who may not be ready for that position.
Well, perfect example, Dan, is what happened in Denver, right? I don't think Vic Fangio did a bad job this year. Yeah. No, they were fine. They were went 7-10. If you look at the way now the offense wasn't great, but the defense was really good. You saw the development of some young players there. Patrick Surtain, like I said, contender for defensive rookie of the year. But the minute you hire George Payton, you think, okay, like we're eventually going to bring in George Payton's coach.
Yeah.
Same thing, you look at like Tennessee. They hung on to Mike Mularkey for those 2 years, and they wound up having to fire him after a winning season because John Robinson made the decision. Eventually, I've got to find my own guy, and it really worked out for them. They went and got Mike Vrabel. And so I think when you like hire a new GM, there's always that idea if you're hanging on to a coach, that coach is sort of walking the green mile. And I just think it makes for a cleaner process if you're giving the GM an opportunity to pick his coach. And in a competitive market where they're going to be competing for candidates with Chicago, with Minnesota, having the opportunity to hire the coach the way the Bears and Vikings are going to offer that, I think helps you out too.
We're talking Albert Breer, senior NFL reporter, lead content strategist for the Monday Morning Quarterback. Has anybody talked to Boomer Esiason on how he got to the moment where he is reading a text, not maybe sure who the text is, that Aaron Rodgers is going to boycott the Super Bowl if the Packers make it to the Super Bowl?
I have no idea where that came from. I mean, I would say, I like Aaron's like one of those guys who likes to watch the world burn. You know what I mean? Like, and I actually think for a good portion of, the off season from like January to July, I think he probably kicked back and spent a lot of that time in Hawaii and watched everybody obsess over him and watch the people, in Green Bay like squirm, like people that, I think, he had obviously had issues with, whether it's Brian Gutekunst or Mark Murphy, watch them, in uncomfortable positions and kind of like relished in that. And so like the only explanation I can come up with is maybe he made the offhanded comment to somebody when he was pissed off, didn't really mean it. And then, I mean, how these things work sometimes, Dan, it can turn into a game of telephone, where it goes from one person to the next. And all of a sudden now what might've been a joke to begin with becomes the truth.
Yeah, it was kind of crazy, but it just feels like Aaron
Rodgers. Crazy idea. I mean, like for how long the guy has been, I think about like 11 years, like how close they've gotten to getting back to the Super Bowl. You remember the crazy game in Seattle when it looked like they were going and like how close he's gotten the last few years. Last year, like, should he have run it in? Did he do the right thing? Like that fourth down decision, like all these different things, like he's been knocking on the door so long. And the idea that he would get there and be like, screw it. I'm like, F you NFL, I'm not playing. It's just, I don't know.
I don't believe any of that. There's no shred of truth in that.
Now, do I think like he thinks it's funny that like, that for, 24 hours, that got traction? I think he probably does think that's funny. Like, even though he gets like mad about it, like I do think he probably got a kick out of that.
It's weird. It feels like he's an underdog and he's probably going to win the MVP. And it feels like Brady feels like an underdog because he's not going to win the MVP. And you know how great players use any kind of motivation.
Yeah.
It's Rodgers has his motivation, even though he's going to be decorated. Here's Brady saying, I had maybe the best year of my career or one of the best, and I'm 44 years of age. And we didn't get, I think if they got the number one seed, that Brady wins the MVP. I think I know the shutout against the Saints hurt him greatly, but it almost felt like whoever was going to get home field advantage between those two was going to win the MVP.
I think that's fair. And like, I think like you look at Brady and the impact he's made on Tampa, like he's sort of become the program there, and like, I think if you went to their training camp the last 2 years, you could really see it. Like there are so many tenets of who Brady is, of what Brady is, that have sort of become what the Bucs are. And you look at the intensity of their practice. And I remember talking to Bruce Arians and Jason Light about this in the summer. So like Tom like created like this atmosphere, this tension on offense that everything needs to be a certain way. And then that winds up carrying over to the defense because they're practicing that way, and then Jason Pierre-Paul on the defensive side sort of picked up the baton and says, we're going to hold ourselves to this standard too. It's just, and I think he was a huge part of that in New England too, to be honest with you, like why they were that way in New England. And you even see some of the details have slipped the last couple of years in New England. Like Brady creates that. And so like his value to that franchise goes well beyond like just the numbers he's put up or where they are in the standings. And I think that's what BA was getting at when he said that the other day. And even like the ability to bring like guys like Brashard Perriman and Cyril Grayson up and get them in position to produce. Like that's something we saw a lot of years in New England, right? Like the New England was always able to do that. And so I think Brady's value, again, like what BA was getting at, goes well beyond. And then I think with Rodgers, there's a great case, no Zadarius Smith for most of the year, no Jair Alexander. He still hasn't played a game with his left tackle, David Bakhtiari. Aaron Jones was out for a time. Like they have maintained their level going through a boatload of injuries. So both guys have a great case. I mean, I think it's those two and Joe Burrow for the MVP. That's the way I see it.
Raiders still going to hire a coach, even though they made the playoffs?
So like they have I can tell you, like having talked to Mark Davis about this a couple of times, like he really wanted to give Rich Bisaccia a fair shot. And they like, if you go back like October, November, December, the idea was we want to give this guy a good run at being able to create like what he sees as his team. And I remember Mark Davis saying this to me, like I asked where he stood. He's like, Rich is the head coach of the Raiders, saying that in a declarative way. And you look like they're 7-5 under him. He got them turned around. They won a game right after the John Gruden email fiasco in his first game as the interim coach. They survived a 1-5 stretch in the middle of the season. They survived, obviously the Henry Ruggs thing has greater implications than football, but that was tough on the locker room, too. And they survived that. And so, I think you have every reason to look at Rich Bisaccia and say, this guy deserves a chance to have the job full time. And if you want to hang on to Mike Mayock thinks the world of him. The locker room thinks the world of him. The one thing that I think, the one caveat here is sort of the business side to this, right? And building something in Vegas. And they had a lot of turnover on their business side in the summer, Dan. Their longtime president, Mark Bedane, wound up out. And they're still reworking what the business side looks like. I think there was this feel in the organization that they were going to take a big swing, and whether it was going and landing Jim Harbaugh or trying to work out some sort of coach trade. This is something I, wrote a couple months ago that like, would they make a swing for like a Mike Tomlin? I think that business aspect to it and being able to kind of be a player on the scene in Vegas was part of the thinking before. The question is whether or not what Rich Bisaccia has been able to do over the last 3 months is enough to supersede what, I think was the desire to kind of make a splash on the scene in Vegas.
Okay, but explain this to me. If you're trading for Mike Tomlin, I hate putting Mike Tomlin's name out there because you
don't know if he wants to
exactly.
Go. But
But when you trade a coach, it's not like you trade a player and a player may go, I don't want to go. Like Mike Tomlin's the head coach of the Steelers. Could you trade him if he didn't want to go?
No, you can't. No.
Okay.
No. But I mean, like, these things are always difficult and they have to sort of be put in place ahead of time. And we haven't seen one in a long time. I think the last one was Gruden, right? Like, was it Gruden from the Raiders to the Bucks? Yeah. And obviously we saw it happen with Parcells and Belichick. But yeah, this is something that like I had sort of been tracking for the last 2 or 3 months. And it had come up with Sean Payton potentially with the Bears. And like you said, like Sean Payton doesn't want to go to the Bears. So like, I don't think that's the reason that one didn't get real traction. But like you think about the idea of it, right? Like, and it sort of matches up what happened in college. Like USC didn't go and hire like Nevada's head coach or Washington State's head coach. They stole another Blue Bloods head coach. They stole Oklahoma's head coach. Same thing with LSU. LSU didn't go and hire Billy Napier from Louisiana. They took Notre Dame's head coach. And so like this idea has sort of gained traction in NFL circles over the last couple of months, especially with the pipeline on the coaching side a little dry. And so like, I do know that it's something a couple teams at least have explored. And yeah, I mean, it would be complicated and difficult. But, I do know like what teams were looking at was like, okay, has Sean Payton reached his natural conclusion in New Orleans? Has Mike Tomlin reached his natural conclusion in Pittsburgh? That doesn't mean Tomlin wants to leave Pittsburgh. It doesn't mean Payton wants to leave New Orleans. It's that teams are sort of trying to think outside the box and getting themselves to a place where it's like, could we do something that hasn't been done in a long time, but was relatively routine in the late 90s and early aughts?
You have Peyton Manning's group and you have John
Mm-hmm.
Elway's group vying for, ownership of the Denver Broncos. How does the NFL do this with the bids, approving the sale of? Does it go to
Mm-hmm.
Elway's group or Peyton Manning's group?
It's like I would say this. Looking at the way that these things have been handled, in my time covering the league, at least, a big piece of this becomes like who the owners want in their club. And, generally when you look at these big decisions that are made, and it's great to have a guy like Peyton Manning on board or John Elway on board, but what the league really wants is like a billionaire who can invest back into the league. And that's what David Tepper was. David Tepper has endless resources. And there were other bidders. David Tepper wasn't, I don't believe he was the high bidder on the Panthers. But like the league saw it as, we want to have this guy in our club. This guy's going to be able to invest back, and he's going to be a great resource in the room when we're talking about like big picture league matters. You look at the way the LA process went. Stan Kroenke, like, did the Rams have the best case for leaving their city? No. The Raiders and Chargers both had better cases for leaving their city. But who was going to be able to build something spectacular in Los Angeles?
Yeah.
Who was going to be able to invest the most? It was Stan Kroenke. And so, like, I know what you're saying, Dan. Like, and we're all going to kind of latch on to, Elway's involved with these guys, Manning's involved with those guys. I think more likely than anything else is that the NFL is going to be focused on whichever billionaire is funding the whole thing. And it's like, who has the deepest pockets?
But I would want to keep Manning on ESPN. I think it's better for the league that
Yeah.
that he's a broadcaster analyst. I know that he has a bigger picture here and wants to be an owner. But as you're saying, it's not about who you are, the name recognition. It's what's the value you bring to this process with the other owners here.
Right. And I mean, Manning is interesting because I think Manning does want to be involved on the football side, where Elway, that ship has already sort of sailed. Like, he was, willing and ready to hand the baton off to George Payton in Denver. Manning's interesting just because I know, like, when he went to Denver, one of the perks for him was like the idea of getting to see John Elway do it. And, he's always been really interested in like the transactions of the NFL and the way a team is built. And so, I'm with you. Like, I think like the league would probably look at it and say like there's value in Manning in different areas. And I don't think we've seen like the full breadth of what, Manning's like second act in the NFL is going to be. But certainly, yeah, like you see, like he could be a really good broadcaster. There's no question about that. Or like he could wind up being a John Elway style team builder. I think both those things are in play for him.
Always great to talk to you, Albert. Thanks for joining us.
All right. Thanks, Dan.
That's Albert Breer. You can become smarter. You can read the Monday Morning Quarterback. He's the senior NFL reporter, lead content strategist.